Today, Charles Wallace joins me, and let me just say what a man he is. I went onto his podcast a few months ago, and there's no way I couldn't have him back on here. He's an amazing guy, and you're going to understand this today when I talk to him about his own podcast, about him being an author. He's battled a few problems with his physical health and also mental health. And Charles, is going to be an absolute belter of a show. I welcome you to the podcast.
Jamie, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. So, as I mentioned before, so you are the host of a podcast, the Bare Essentials podcast, but it doesn't start there. It starts, I'm sure, a few years back. So, when did you try and get the idea of starting a podcast, and what molded you into who you are today?
Yeah, I think the podcast stemmed from my own issues as far as my physical health. I'm 52 now. I would say that this really started at age 47 for me. I'm not a tall individual at all. I'm in America, so I'm 5'5" tall. That's 65 inches tall. But my weight was really bad. I don't know what it translates for you guys into stone, but I was 267 pounds, which is, I was put it to you this way. I used to get some shirts from a band I like called the Dropkick Murphys, and the size I needed was literally the size was fat. That was the size of the shirt that they sold that I actually had to get. So, I mean, I was definitely a big guy, but I mean, it was more than that because growing up, I was always athletic. I played football, soccer over here in America, football over there to you guys. I played football. I got to the level of, at the time, semi-professional over here. So I was always athletic. So my life was really in a downward spiral. I was overweight. I had heart conditions. I was taking heart medication. And Jamie, I kind of got to the point where I just didn't really care too much. I would go to bed at night and I would have these pains in my chest, these heart palpitations. And I was kind of going to bed rolling the dice every night where I'd see if I woke up the next day or not, And finally, one day, I finally decided, you know what, I got to try to get my act together. I did. I went. I saw a doctor, and I told this story a few times on my own podcast and in my own social media. But I call it the story of eight. The doctor actually said to me, he asked me if I had 8 friends. I said, yeah, I have 8 friends. Why? He said, yeah, because you're going to make a heavy coffin. And I was kind of the light bulb. So from there, I started to work out. I started to eat healthy. My wife, she's been on her own journey as far as fitness. So together, I mean, I'm proud to say together, we've lost well over 200 pounds between us. And it was at that point, it wasn't a quick fix because I've been down that route before as far as fad diets, quick fix, things like that. So at that point, I did it the right way. I really ate healthy. I really got into my workouts. I was really into mentally pushing myself to do difficult things. So I lost the weight, and then it was about 3 years ago, New Year's Day, around New Year's, I started thinking about, how can I help some other people maybe outside of my own weight loss. So what ends up happening is I decided to start the podcast. And the genesis of the name for the podcast, the Bare Essentials, comes from, my own kids call me Bear. So, and I'm under no illusions, Jamie. I understand that I was called Bear because I was, I was soft and cuddly, but I like the name. I stuck with it because it kind of reminds me of who I was, where I was, and who I'm not wanting to go back to. So that was it. I said, I lost the weight. Now let's see if I can start having some really, cool conversations with people around the world. And if people see that I can do that, they may start to think, wow, if that guy can do these types of things, I'm sure I can do it too. So that was the whole genesis of the Bare Essentials.
These cool conversations. And let me just say, the reason why I got in contact with you was when you did a podcast with the England amputee head coach, the former England amputee head coach, Scott Rogers, who I've been in contact with ever since. Of course, I had him on Inside the Mind of over here. So when you spoke to Scott, what was that like? What was that? Because obviously he's a really big name, isn't he? Was that kind of a real eye-opener as to how far the podcast can actually go?
Yeah, Scott was a really, I just seeing what Scott was doing with the amputee team, it was just, I think I mentioned this to you before in one of our conversations. I didn't really go after guests from a perspective of how big was their name. I was going after the guests from the perspective of how much can this person's story influence or motivate or inspire someone else. Um, don't get me wrong. When I first started the podcast, I think like anybody, yeah, it was there in my head. I'm like, I'm gonna interview this person, that person, whatever. And I did start out in doing that way. There's some really big names that I had over here. A gentleman named Tony Horton, who was the creator of P90X, which I use to help with my own weight loss, but he sold over millions of copies of P90X. He was the personal trainer for the rock star Tom Petty. He had trained Bruce Springsteen. So having guys like that on, and I'll never forget this, when I reached out to ask if he would be on the show, his people responded and said, "What are your numbers?" Now, Jamie, this was when I had just really started. I didn't have numbers. I didn't know, besides my mom who was really watching or listening to the show. So I was just say, you know what? I answered the woman. I said, I don't even think I have enough numbers that will warrant Tony coming on, but I think it would be cool to have him on. This is what I'm trying to do. I want to inspire people. I think it would make for a good conversation. And she responded and said, yeah, you definitely don't have numbers, LOL, but I don't know why I'm going to put this through to Tony. I think this is something he might want to do. And 2 hours later, I got a response from Tony Horton saying, yeah, love to do it. So we did it. And I won't lie, it was a surreal moment for me. As you can see behind me, I'm definitely into music. Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen, Billy Idol, right? He trained those guys. I mean, having him on and listening to those stories, for me, it was a pinch myself moment. Like, I can't believe I'm having a conversation with this guy. And then when I have somebody like Scott on, it's a little different, right? It's not as much about like the name. It's about when I think about what he's doing. And then I was thinking about the players on that team and what they're doing. That was where it started to motivate me to be like, wow, well, I'm capable of doing even more. Look what the hell these guys are all doing. So yeah, it kind of ebbs and flows with me as far as the name of the guest, as far as how much, fame, or if they're not famous. And quite frankly, I don't care anymore whether anybody really knows who they are, because I think regardless of if someone knows who they are, I have the ability to bring their story out to people and help inspire. And it happened again to me though with someone else. I want to mention this, especially being on your show now. I have a lot of great audience and connection with the UK, and that I've been really blessed, and I feel fortunate because I feel like I've really, really had a great connection with a lot of the folks over in the UK. And just recently, I actually was really, really fortunate. The movie, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, the Guy Ritchie movie, I actually was fortunate to have on the author of that book, Damian Lewis. And that was, again, another surreal moment for me. And, I was thinking going into that show, we were going to talk about, wow, you got to meet Guy Ritchie and the movie. And, Jamie, it was amazing. The thing that came away from me from that podcast was about how, as we all have a responsibility to sometimes keep our own emotions in check, to bring stories to the world. Because he told a story of when he was a correspondent, he was over in Africa, and there was a child who was dying from malnourishment. And he said it took every fiber in his being that he wanted to go and just immediately do something for that child. And what he knew he had to do was he had to sit back and hold the camera and record so that he could get that message to the world so it could help other children. That was a big moment for me, and it really stuck with me. And it showed me that with these stories and the people, it's a responsibility we have to bring this to others and to hopefully put a message out there of some hope and positivity. I mean, I think, my family was never like outwardly like looking at me, at least in a way that I perceived they were looking at me as less or as bad, right? They were just, I was their dad, and at the end of the day, it was more, I think, me inside my own head thinking, man, I got to do something here. And, you know, it's interesting because you probably heard this a lot, right? People always say, find your why. And I had my why, Jamie. I had a wife, I had 4 kids, and you know what? My why, I still was doing all these, self-destructive behaviors to put myself in a position where I was the unhealthiest I'd ever been in my life. My why was there. It took me figuring out finally that it wasn't about the why. It was about the why not. And it was me. I was the why not. Every reason I wasn't achieving what I thought I should be achieving or needed to achieve, it was all because of me. It was me. And once I realized that and changed it, that's when the switch went off and I made the changes. So you know, that was how it finally happened.
Was it as easy as, I mean, I suppose with a lot of people that they think they can lose weight by doing one thing, but then they're harming themselves in another way. How did you kind of snap out of this unhealthy lifestyle that you were living? Because you probably would have had to change your whole way of living.
Yeah, we did. And it was a lot to do with, and again, I'm not a fitness expert, right? But it was diet. I had to eat better. Um, I've always had that. I mentioned to you from going back in my youth, my athletic career through high school and even some college when I played sports. And then even right after college and things like that, I've always been growing up. I boxed. I was doing a lot of boxing, a lot of martial arts, still training, doing things like that through my early 20s at least. So I always at least had a mindset to lean back on that could help me get through that. But it was a lot of diet. And listen, I'm physical, like the exercise part of it. I I kind of enjoyed doing that. I won't lie. Once I started to do it, I enjoyed it. And, truth be told, I really, really enjoy pushing myself to do things that are really difficult. And I tell people all the time, I sometimes I think I need that mental part of the workout more than the physical. So I would always try during that time to set up workouts at least once every couple weeks that were it was just basically more a mind kind of thing, like, 30 to 60 minutes of tire sledges just to stand there and hit the tire for 30 to 60 minutes just to show myself that I could do it. But yeah, I think the hardest part is wanting it to be quick. It took me a long time to get to that point in my life. And I had to understand that in order to get away from that person and to get back to a healthy person, and more importantly, stay a relatively healthy person, I had to do it the right way. I had to be strategic. I had to eat right. I had to exercise, but I had to really, really understand that this was now a way of life. And once I kind of got my mind to that and I knew it wasn't going to be this super quick thing, and obviously in the beginning, when you go first start to lose that kind of weight, because I was heavy as I was, yeah, the first 25 pounds comes off really quick. But that's all kind of that's a little bit of a, it's misleading because you got a lot of work to do still. So yeah, but it's a way of life now, man. I have to, as you can see now, man, I get up early. I try to get my workouts in. I try to get outside. I try to do everything I do with the podcast. All of it is about, wanting a better life at this point.
So let's talk about your podcast then, the Bare Essentials podcast, and the slogan being "Never hibernate on your goals," which to me is a brilliant slogan for a podcast. And I suppose it's quite obvious that you've got a bear in the name of the podcast, then hibernation in the slogan.
Yeah, like I said, it was funny when when I the name of that and the slogan, I still remember this. I At the time we had one of the things that helped me lose all the weight and get healthy was we got a German Shepherd puppy, Klaus, and he loves walking, loves his walks, especially in the winter. He loves the cold. Like this dog, you know, doesn't matter. He loves the cold. And I don't mind walking in the cold, right? So I'm out walking him, and it's around that time when I'm thinking about the podcast. I literally was walking him, and the name, I was trying to decide between the bare essentials and the bare necessities. And I said, you know what? I think the bare necessities has already been kind of taken. So I'm going to stay away from the bare necessities, right? I just thought of the Disney movie. So I came up with the bare essentials. And it was weird on that walk. It was just the never hibernate on your goals just popped into my head. And I couldn't wait to get back to the house and start to put together some of the, description and the logo and all that good stuff. And it's morphed into that. And I've had a lot of people on the show that amazingly enough, I've had a lot of military people on, special forces from the UK and from the US, and they all compliment the never hibernate on your goals tagline. Like they really really seem to like that too. So yeah, so that I feel like I feel like by my kids calling me Bear, it really put me in a great marketing position as far as the podcast goes.
Oh, you just mentioned there, like you had a lot of fun putting together the podcast, and I suppose that's a project. I like to call them projects, and currently I'm quite thin on projects that I want to be getting on with. And I suppose it goes back to occupying your mind with something, right? Because everyone wants to have an occupied mind, but I suppose when you have a voice like you do, when you got ideas like you do, to set something up like a podcast, it's just an amazing feeling because you're so optimistic about what can happen, who you can get on, even just making a logo and making descriptions, just having a bit of a play around with it. So when you were putting it together then, how long did it take you to really start to concrete your ideas in? And then you got your first guest on, which obviously I've seen.
Yeah, I honestly, I think this really happened quick. It was probably within that mid to late December, January timeframe a few years back. And um I knew I knew the first guest I wanted to have on because I had lost all the weight. It had been probably that November, someone that my son was actually fighting amateur MMA, and one of his trainer slash training partners, Aaron Nobles, he's a life coach, and he was doing a podcast and called the Enlightenment Movement, and he reached out and asked me to be on his podcast. And I'm like, it was weird because in my mind I was thinking about my own podcast. So I said, you know what, this might be a good way to test the waters to see if I like really like it or see how it is. And I won't lie, it was a Saturday morning. I recorded that episode with Aaron and I was hooked. I'm like, okay. And then my mind at that point, and you listen, for me, it's probably good and bad, right? But my mind is, I would say, my mind does not shut off. It's funny because my wife needs to sleep in total darkness and quiet. I need to put headphones on because if I don't, my mind is just always racing, right? So, but yeah, again, I had all these ideas. What am I going to call the show? And then once the logo came, or the name, I kind of start thinking about, obviously, I'll use a bear for the logo. And then I think everything just spiraled from there, as you probably have seen in some of my social media type, posts and stuff like that. It was just kind of fun, but I've created this a kind of bear universe where I've made posts and quotes of bears as different characters. And it's been really, really fun to do, with putting the podcast with the social media and all that good stuff. So, yeah, it's really been a great journey. It's good and bad, right? The Mankind Project did stem from a bit of a negative experience for me. When I was doing the Bare Essentials, I was part of a network. At the time, I was asked to join a network called NGBN. And, Jamie, I've always said about the podcast, whenever it becomes about something that's more related to just me, or where it's trying to make money or people want to try to use it to make money, then it's time for me to move on. And whatever, for what it's worth, just with the whole NGBN, it just didn't align anymore, so I moved away from that. And obviously still the Bare Essentials exists, but not part of that network at this point. So I was at a point where I felt like I had to kind of come up with something else as a positive to kind of, counteract a bit of a negative experience I had. And it was weird. It started out as what you just said. And then I started getting a lot of interaction with, with women about, hey, I like this idea. Kindness is universal, all this good stuff, and then it really just morphed into more about just people sometimes look at being kind as it's weak and I think being taken advantage of, especially men. So it was kind of like, look, we don't have to be always, it's not always about being tough and all that good stuff, right? We can be kind and helping people, and a good word, a small act of kindness, a ripple effect can really go a long way in helping people. So that was really where that came from. It's more just kind of a social media platform where I try to put posts up and just try to put a little bit of brighten people's day, honestly, man. That's really all it is. And it I think that though really led me to another thing that has really been near and dear to me is um what I noticed with the Mankind Project was that there are these other avenues. I had a friend of mine that I had on the show. He actually called it these verticals of where you can kind of go in different directions, right? So Bare Essentials has always been about helping, adults and spreading. It's been an adult focused thing. And I really got to thinking about leading into the books and everything about, what, this is really where damn, our kids need this as much as the adults do, right? So, is there a way that I can take this thought process of the bare essentials and these adult themed messages and make them in a way that put it in a way that these kids can maybe relate to, and maybe start to build out that aspect of it? So, not only is there the Bare Essentials podcast, which is adults, a lot of deep topics and meaningful topics, but you know what? Now we have also involved in what's called Bear Time Adventures, and that's more of a platform for kids ages 4 to 8 and stories for them to really try to put some positivity to them and help them. Yeah, so I'll show you here in a second. Sorry.
That's all right.
So
Amazing.
this here, I came up with this character, and I mentioned to you, I've always been into martial arts. So, um, I had a gentleman on my show. His name was Robert Chu, runs a clothing apparel line called, which I thought this is so cool to me, man, Spiritual Samurai. This man is just amazing. Lives in California, has his clothing line. He's a federal judge. He's written his own book, Way of the Samurai, something like that, that I just love the book. So I've always been into martial arts, the whole samurai culture. So that's what I came up with. Kuro the bear, he's a samurai bear. And the idea of this book was short stories, because I know kids attention span isn't always that crazy. So it's more about individual chapters in the book. It starts out here in the book with a message from Kuro. As you can probably see there, he even signs the book with his little paw print. But I added a lot of pictures in the book, but each is its own chapter. As you can see here, we start with the Garden of Strength. So it was a way to give kids, there's 7 short stories in there. They're kind of almost like fables, where they do look to really give a message to the kids about, the Garden of Strength is eating healthy. There's a chapter in there called The Land of Distractions, where it's kind of speaking to kids about get away from your devices, right? Your phones and your video games, and get outside to play. And at the end of the book, what I did in it was I put in this thing called the Code of Kuro, and it was something for the kids to really like get into, right? And bravery, friendship, respect, honesty, gratitude. learning and balance. And then there's a section in the book where they can fill out what they learned, and then they add their samurai signature and they read it to their parents. So that book. I One of the pictures from the book, it was a picture of Kuro sitting in the classroom, and on the chalkboard it said brave. I got a message from someone that said I had to copy this picture. Well, they asked me if I could send them an electronic copy of the picture. I said sure. So I sent them an electronic copy, and it was right around when school would start over here, and it was their child needed copies of that picture in his folders and in his backpack. And now he was brave and he wasn't afraid to go to kindergarten now. And I that just really was pretty amazing to me. I got a message from someone that their child was somewhat nonverbal, and they wrote me this message telling me that ever since the book, he has been verbal and acting out scenes from the book. And Jamie, I got to tell you, it's just the kind of stuff that I could never have. That to me, it just blows me away. But the whole idea was I wanted to do a series with Kuro, and the next thing was, and it's out now, but it's not as much that way. I tried to put out something more exciting for kids, and with it being around Halloween, I put out this Midnight Crystal book. Uh, Not super long, but a lot of cool pictures. The idea of this one is, if you can see the back here, it's almost like the Monster Avengers. they He meets all these Victor the Vampire, Frankie Stein, Walter the Werewolf, and together they have to the theme of the book is the the monsters we see are sometimes the heroes we need. And they team up with he teams up with all these monsters, and they have to take on the evil wizard Malvagor and the Midnight Crystal. So I self-publish these. It's fun. I'm not making a ton of money off of these, but it's just the fun of it is more than it's a lot of fun to do, and the messages are really rewarding that I get back from the parents.
And last thing from me, Charles, with the book itself, are you looking to get it into schools? Because I know that if you were like a local publisher here in the UK, you could probably work with primary, secondary schools in order to get these books to them.
Yeah, I would love to, especially the first book. I think the first book, which, isn't as themed around holidays or anything like that, right? The first book, I think, is definitely something that would benefit, those kids in, say, first to second grade, at least based on the feedback I'm getting right now. You know this from doing your own show and things like that. Like we always have a little bit of bias as far as what we do, right? But I did have a few teacher friends of mine read it, and some folks who ran daycare centers, and they thought it was really good. So I think once I get through this this third book, I'm definitely going to push more to try to get that into potentially into schools. And that was kind of the new YouTube channel is also in that vein. The Bear Time Adventures is taking it instead of book format, right? It's now, these short stories. There's 4 out there so far of just different characters where the adventure is maybe 7 to 10 minutes long, some sound effects, some music. I put the images up on the screen, but trying to get that channel where it's for those kids ages, say 4 to 8, along with the books, because, and look, I don't want to be dramatic or political. I try not to be, but I mean, Jamie, I do at my age now. I really believe this, man. I think that our society and our world is not doing right by our kids right now. I think we're in a bit of a sad state. And, quite frankly, again, compliment to you. Meeting you and seeing what you're doing at such a young age was definitely something to me that said, you know what, there is some hope. Big kudos to your parents for doing an amazing job. But listen, I don't think there's a lot of kids out there that aren't as fortunate as someone like yourself, or even as I was growing up, right? I think now too many people are allowing, I don't even know what to call it, man, but there's just a lot of, to me, bad things going on in this world that I think sometimes the content that's available for these kids is absolutely, it's not right. I'll leave it at that. I don't think it's right. And I think as adults and someone like myself, someone like you, maybe it's not the biggest, right? We're not Joe Rogan, but we have a platform. And I think with that platform comes a responsibility to try to do something that's always been my thing, whether it was losing the weight, the podcast, writing the book, now Bear Time Adventures, is I should always try to use that to do more and to try to help people. And now the goal is really, really trying to help these kids and give them some positivity and some positive content that they can look at and learn from.
Absolutely, Charles. And I think there's a lot more that needs to be done from people like me and yourself, who, of course, are trying to help smaller communities around the world to impact the bigger communities as we speak. And I think there's loads of people. It's just about finding those people to really collaborate and work with. So, Charles, it's been an absolute pleasure once again. This is now the third or fourth time that we've spoken. And of course, it's been the best time that we have spoken. You're a Manchester United fan. Their Essentials podcast, spoken about physical, mental health, your books, the project of mankind, and everything in between. It's been an absolute pleasure, Charles. Thanks for coming on.
Jamie, thanks again, man. Keep up the great work over there, man. You're doing a fantastic job.